In this presentation, we'll discuss market inefficiencies caused by discrimination. First, let's define discrimination. Discrimination occurs when a producer or consumer changes their selling or buying behavior based on non-market characteristics of the other side of the market. And in particular, we'll use an example of labor market discrimination, which happens when equally productive workers are treated unequally based on some observable characteristics that aren't related to market characteristics. First, some context. In 2004, a couple of economists conducted an experiment in which they responded to job listings sending out resumes that were identical other than the names that were on the resumes. On some, they listed traditionally white-sounding names, and on others, they listed traditionally black-sounding names. What they found was that those with white names received 50% more callbacks for interviews than those with black-sounding names, even though the qualifications and experience listed on the resumes were identical. Thus, they found evidence of labor market discrimination. So what does this discrimination do to the market? First of all, let's consider the market that's shown, where we have separated out the white workers on the left from the non-white workers on the right. In a market without discrimination, we would see that the equilibrium wage for white workers as well as non-white workers would be the same across the whole market. In this case, say $8. And in this example, the equilibrium quantity of each is also the same. Now, if discrimination exists and there is a preference for white workers, then we would see a demand shift in the white market, which would generate a higher equilibrium wage for white workers, and a demand shift in the non-white market, generating a lower equilibrium wage for the non-white workers. So what would that mean for an individual firm? Well, if there's a higher market wage for white workers, then hiring white workers now costs more than hiring a non-white worker. And a discriminating firm that wants to only or mostly hire white employees is going to end up paying more, meaning they'll hire fewer workers than they would have before. Because this is what actually tends to happen in the market. Remember that the demand shift over in the white worker market was because of some non-market preferences. And so just because the firm's preference may be to hire more white workers does not mean they actually can afford to hire that higher number of workers. So what will happen is they'll pay that premium wage in order to attract more white workers than non-white workers, but they'll only end up hiring the number of those workers that they can afford. So besides the moral and ethical concerns surrounding discrimination, we see that discrimination causes inefficiency in markets, where fewer workers are hired, but for a higher price. Possible solutions are to, one, just let the market sort it out. So the non-discriminating firms would have higher profits, and therefore either the discriminating firms would be driven out of business, or they would be pressured to stop their discriminating habits in order to compete with the non-discriminating firms. Clearly, though, this market pressure is not enough to eliminate the discrimination that we find even today in labor markets. So another solution, and really probably the best we've got at the moment, is government regulation. And we do in the U.S. have the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, whose job it is to regulate and hopefully do away with discrimination in labor markets. You can check out their website for the list of types of discrimination that are illegal and some of the things that the Commission does to discourage those types of discrimination. The problem here, and the reason that we see discrimination still Continuing, that it's often difficult to prove when a firm is discriminating, and particularly difficult to prove that they're discriminating against one of the protected classes that have been ruled illegal to discriminate upon. What is clear is that discrimination exists in markets, and that market forces are not sufficient to overcome the inefficiencies that discrimination cause. And so some sort of regulation or external force is going to be necessary to correct these market inefficiencies due to discrimination.